In the middle of Mexico, in the city center of Oaxaca, not long before the middle of the 1800s, there was a man named Joaquin Vasconcelos who owned a clothing store on the main square in town. The store owner became aware of a young boy in the neighborhood who had lost his father and whose mother was struggling. He gave the boy a job in his store, and over time, finding that he held much promise, he would provide the boy with clothing for school, clothes he could not otherwise have afforded. The boy's name was Jose de la Cruz Porfirio Diaz Mori, later known simply as Porfirio Diaz, the dictator who ruled Mexico for nearly 35 years. The shopkeeper does not re-enter our story directly, but his grandson does. And his grandson, Jose Vasconcelos, would become a prominent intellectual, a highly influential minister of education, and a vehement opponent of Porfirio Diaz, the dictator with intimate connections to the Vasconcelos family. This week's excerpt comes from a larger work entitled La Raza Cósmica, or The Cosmic Race. I first discovered Mr. Vasconcelos in this book. The Mexico Reader is a collection of essays and excerpts from larger works, all of which are just a few pages long. They're all interesting and provide great insight into the history and culture of this complex country. We've provided a link in the description below. Using that link is going to help the channel out. Again, I really think it's a worthwhile investment. Follow along, get a preview of what's coming next. And while you're at it, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button for us. It helps us out and it's free of charge. This week's, and I have to be honest, when I first read it, the writing struck me more as a work of mystical admonishment than some sort of prophecy based on racial ideas that are now seen as dated and perhaps even bigoted. But on its surface and ultimately in its popularity, the latter description is probably more fitting. In his work, Vasconcelos turns traditional racial ideas on their head, but the ideas are still based on notions of race. In La Raza Cósmica, Vasconcelos inverts negative stereotypes and melds them into positives. But in doing so, he actually validates the basis of the mode of thinking that initially produced those same stereotypes. According to Vasconcelos, other races had previously and alternately spearheaded human progress. These were, in order, the black race, Indian, Mongol, and white. Now, with the unique cultural, historic, geographic circumstances of the Americas, Latin Americans will be the leading race. Vasconcelos would insist that this race was Latin, but he actually contradicted himself and said it would be a combination of all races. Let's look. So-called Latin peoples are not primarily speaking Latins, but a conglomeration of different types and races. In Latin America, 1,000 bridges are available for the sincere and cordial fusion of races. What is going to emerge out there is the definitive race, made up of the genius and blood of all peoples, and for that reason, more capable of true brotherhood and a truly universal vision. So, what to make of a work like La Raza Cósmica? Over time, as humanity's understanding of race, racism, and social prejudice has evolved, La Raza Cósmica has been something of a trigger for unacceptable views. But the thing to remember is the past is not politically correct. In fact, it's usually downright offensive or at least unsettling. And this was a time when biology was new and people were very excited about these ideas. Twisting Charles Darwin in ways he never intended, social Darwinism was an idea commonly accepted in intellectual circles. Even progressives like U.S. President Woodrow Wilson promoted sterilization and eugenics as a means of bettering humanity. Turning negative stereotypes on their head and proclaiming that Latin America was an ultimate expression of human races, Vasconcelos altered the notion of survival of the fittest into survival of the beautiful. Yes, it is still a system based on race, but its intent was to undermine the prejudices Vasconcelos had encountered as a person whose life experiences repeatedly led him abroad for work and political reasons. What's more, and this is just my reading of this small excerpt, but I sincerely do not think that Vasconcelos believed his assertions or his philosophical prophecy was literally true. I do think he believed Latin Americans had unique offerings for humanity due to the unique combination of historical and cultural forces that shaped Latinos. And I believe that his writing was intended to inspire confidence and pride in the people that he viewed as oppressed and downcast. And I think it worked. In fact, the term La Raza was adopted in the 1960s and 70s by modern Chicano movements in the U.S., whose patrons transformed Vasconcelos' message, rejected the idea of a combination of races while embracing the idea of equality. And from this basis, they demanded equality in numerous U.S. social issues. But perhaps the most important thing to know about Jose Vasconcelos has nothing to do with this text or even its impact. Vasconcelos would serve as Minister of Education in the early years following the Mexican Revolution. He was essential in founding two national orchestras, and perhaps most impressively, Vasconcelos engaged the artists and funded the mission that would pretty much define 20th century Mexican art. The public murals of Orozco, Rivera, and Siqueiros were directly funded by Vasconcelos as Minister of Education. Altogether, Vasconcelos seems to have been something of a towering figure in Mexican intellectual circles and beyond. His race-based philosophies and his derogatory and somewhat contradictory remarks about indigenous Mexicans has damaged his stature, but not so much that he is willfully forgotten. His role in Mexican history as both intellectual and politician continues to endure.